Good morning, everyone. Um, it's it's a pleasure having people in physical space, and gosh, what a year and a half, right? We've gotten so proficient at Zoom and being on little digital screens that all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, how do we do this? A shout out to Tennessee, who's it's her first week really of taking on training as Eno, which is the person that leads the chants. And any of you that have looked at the sheet know there are lots of Japanese names and different things going on there. And great job. Great job. Welcome, Sharif. Good to see you. And is it Jennifer hiding there off on somewhat on camera? And welcome. And Audrey, it's great to see you back. Here in the room we have Lori Akasha, of course, Tennessee, Winston, Chalet, and Gabriel. And those of you that were on for service this morning will know that Gabriel recently, in the last week or two, lost his great-grandmother, Pearl Gale Sherman, and he did an offering at the altar, and that, of course, is available to anyone at any time. Just let us know. I don't know if anybody else noticed, but one of the purposes of doing service is to honor the teachings and honor all the teachers and honor our parents, teachers, nation, kind of honor the whole thing, right? And then in each of the individual chants, the Heart Sutra really contains the truth of wisdom and compassion of Zen practice, and then identity of relative and absolute brings together this notion of, well, there's the enlightened, empty, absolute space, but it exists in perfect harmony and coexistence as a box and its lid, with the relative or phenomenal everyday world that we have to move around in, or we get to move around in, and with our bodies and our cars and the things we need to move around. So this is a perfect dance between that wide open spiritual space and the everyday phenomenal space. And then the third chant is really honoring those who have gone before us, our ancestors. And that's, of course, where Gabriel came in and spoke to Gigi, his great-grandmother. And I don't know if anybody else noticed, but one more thing. The other thing about the chants is that just the act of chanting together creates sangha, creates harmony, creates unity, creates community. And one of the instructions for chanting is to chant with your ears. To chant with your whole self and your heart, but to chant with your ears, not your mouth, which means really be attuned and therefore easier to be in tune. And it's a great way to live your life too. So now, having said all that, Gabriel did the dedication to his grandmother, and coming out of that, our new Eno, Tennessee, the second she opened her mouth, it was like opening the heart, as she said, "May penetrating light dispel the darkness of ignorance." There was a different resonance. And then when everybody started chanting together, all Buddhas throughout space and time, there was a harmony and a cohesion here in the room. I couldn't hear anybody out there, obviously. But they came together in a completely different way. And that's largely what this practice is about. So we helped Gabriel celebrate the life of his great-grandmother, but really look at the gift he gave to all of us. And you could hear it and feel it. And This practice is that simple in some respects. It's just coming together, opening the heart, sharing, creating a safe space to be whoever we're being at that moment in time, and knowing that it's okay. It's perfect. No matter where we are in our practice, no matter where we are in counting our breaths, no matter where we are in koan study, or if we never choose to do koan study, it's a beautiful thing that can happen. And the same thing in Austin. When we were there 2 weeks ago, and chanting with the women of the Fountain Dupuis clan, there was a beautiful harmony happening there that happens with sisters and mothers, and then by extension with all of us. So I just wanted to note that, because there's all the liturgy, and there's all the koans, and there's all the this bell and that bell, but at a very fundamental level, it is just this. Just us in this room and on this Zoom. And just choosing to spend this time together, and then taking that out further into the world. So thank you, Gabriel. Yeah, it was good teaching. It was nice, as I told Gabriel earlier, it was nice to meet Gigi. And I hope those of you that were on could hear. We're still, with Sharma's coaching and others' urgings, we're still working on solving the sound issue for when other people are speaking other than me, so that we can hear each other well. So I think we'll get a couple of Bluetooth mics or something to help with that. So a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and I want to approach this next topic carefully, because I want to make sure I'm not dishonoring anyone. But an inquiry came up for me. I'm sure everyone is aware of the Surfside condo collapse in Surfside, Florida, some weeks ago, and then the great loss and of life, and anguish of those not knowing what happened to their loved ones in the aftermath of that. And I think that the rescue and recovery is officially at a close. I think it's all the way down to just bare earth and concrete at this point. And this is the part I want to approach gingerly, because it really just sparked an inquiry for me, and I don't want to opine too much on what was said. But the coroner, Florida coroner, a couple weeks ago was talking to relatives of those who were lost, and as a way of offering comfort, said something that went like this. It was like, those that died, their death would have been quick, given the way of the collapse of the building. And then he went on to say that, and given the time of day, they would have been sleeping, so they would not have been conscious of what was happening. And I don't know whether that's scientifically accurate or not, and I'm not an expert in this, but it just sparked an inquiry for me, because I was like, well, that's an interesting, almost clinical scientific view of our existence, and that there's sleep and there's awake. And when you were asleep, you essentially would not be present to anything going on around you. And I did go do some research, and the reason I'm feeling very hesitant about even addressing it in this way is, you know, I don't want this talk to go out in public and then take away any comfort that anybody was feeling about, you know, their loved ones dying, which sounds like I'm about to do, but it's not really that. I was looking at what is the sense of our true self and soul and our being, you know? And so I've asked a couple people that are more knowledgeable than I, and there is some scientific evidence that the processing of sensory input is lessened, or in some cases shut off in our sleep states and in our dream states. And I think most of us know, like in REM or dreaming state, like our arm and leg muscles are essentially paralyzed. You're essentially paralyzed while you're dreaming, except for your heart and your lungs. And that's why we don't, like, physically, for the most part, act out our dreams. So Lori might disagree with that at times. But, you know, there is that. Smell, certainly. Also, there's a lot of evidence that you can't wake somebody up with a smell, which is interesting, because you would think that for survival, smoke, for example, would be something that would wake you up, but there's been some very specific research saying no, that's not true. And then even for sound, there's like mothers are very attuned to the sound of their children, and we're attuned to the sound of our own name, which I think is interesting. There's done research where if you're sleeping and somebody says Gabriel, you will wake up. You know, but if they say Dan, you won't, you know, or not as readily. So there is something going on, you know, that in our sleep state, the processing of sensory input is lessened, and so I think that, you know, from that point of view, you know, certainly being asleep during that kind of calamity might be a different experience than being wide awake. But really my inquiry was less about that and more about what's awake and what's asleep, and our true nature, you know, is it, or that soul, as we would say in other traditions, you know, how does it exist with relationship to suffering and pain, and where is that line? And we've talked about this a lot, you know. Brenda Lee and I, and probably some of you others, share, you know, a lot. Well, we don't share our lucid dreams, but we share the fact that we, you know, have a lot of lucid dreaming going on, and we've talked about dreams before, and then Buddhism, Zen is all about awakening, right? So there's this like a sleep awake. You know, what's a dream? What's not? What's real? What's not? Can I mention a little bit of what we were talking about? Chalet and I were talking earlier about when you start dropping into that emptiness that Zazen can create, the space between the thoughts, you know, where does time go? And you know, she expressed having some experience of timelessness, and then like, but if there's no time, how do I move through the world? Like, if I truly let go of time, what then? You know, if I truly live in the space between thoughts, then how do I function in a thinking, moving, physical world? And then the identity of relative and absolute and the dance between the two comes back. And then I remembered this koan, which may at first feel like it's going a different direction, but it does tie in. It's case 40 in the Blue Cliff record, Nansen's Peony the flower. While conversing with Nansen, the high official Rico said, "The priest Joe said, 'Heaven and earth and I are of the same root. All things and I are one.' That's extraordinarily wonderful." Okay. Nansen pointed to a peony in the front garden and called to the officials saying, "People of the present day, like you, see this one peony as though they were in a dream." And that's the full text of the koan. And so this koan is looking at that same dance between the absolute and the relative, right? That vast empty space of I and all things are one. How wonderful, how wondrous. And it is. When you look out there and don't feel that separation, when you can be with somebody and not feel that separation, when the sunset is you, when the music is you, right? How wondrous. So, what is Nansen doing? Okay, what Nansen's going like, you could say, yeah, Nansen, the jaded old monk, but he's actually playing the role of teacher here. People today see this flower as though they were in a dream. So what's he pointing out here? He's saying, yeah, it is wondrous. Do you see the flower? Because the peony is real too. And you could go over and pluck the peony and hold it in your hand. In my experience, peonies don't last long once you pluck them. So they're best left where they are. Is that right, or am I thinking of poppies?
You're thinking of poppies.
I'm thinking of poppies,
They're
okay.
very delicate.
Poppy, peony.
Well, poppies,
There's a P and O and a
they
Y.
have a lot of petal structure.
Yeah. Okay. My horticulturalist is informing me that I'm wrong, that you can pick a peony, so go for it. But anyway, he's saying, see that peony, don't get lost in the dream. It is wondrous. It is wondrous. And it's a flower right there before you. I and all sentient beings in the 10 directions, all 10,000 things in the 10 directions are one. It is beautiful, and you're right here. What's the next thing in front of you? What do you need to do? And so Nansen is really kind of reeling this official back just a little bit and going, yeah, it is beautiful, it is wondrous, and you still need to function. So how are you going to function having had that experience? How are you going to function having had that experience? How do you take that wonder into the phenomenal world? How do you take it back into your life? We have these moments of zazen together, and then if I happen to hit the right note on the Dharma talk, it might touch one or a couple of you in a certain way, and then you walk back out the door and you got to get in your car and get into traffic or do whatever you do, and it's like, how do I hold on to that little moment of magic? And it feels like it disappears. It's not so much how do you hold on to it, but how do you integrate it into the fabric of who you are, so that the next thing that appears has a different quality to it. And it's not that we live forever in that empty space, but that empty space becomes the basis on which we experience the everyday and the experience of how we respond to it, chanting with our ears, right? Being in attunement with the world comes from that empty place, and then we can use our voice, then we can act, and we can act with efficiency and in accordance with what is there. A couple of moments from my own practice. There was a senior priest at Santa Monica Zen Center, Lawrence. Sharma, you'll remember Lawrence. Lori, you'll remember Lawrence. Melanie, she's smiling. What a beautiful guy, Myeon. And he was hugely influential when I was starting my practice. He was the senior priest there under Yoshin Roshi. And I remember coming in, and I had this violent dream about doing harm to tourist in some other country that I had never been to. And it was, given the nature of my dreams where they feel very real all the time, I came in and I was like, and help, what do I, do with this? And, I remember his guidance at that time was so confounding, as Zen can often be. He was like, well, why do you hold that any different than an actual occurrence? Why are you painting it as not real? And he's like, and I'm like, but I didn't hurt anybody. Really, I didn't. Honestly, I didn't. And he, he really was coming from a place of, well, maybe that's something to look at. And he was really, he so blurred the line between what I called reality and unreality that it was very unsettling. Very unsettling. And that also is why, we encourage everybody to show up together, to practice Zazen before you go on to koan study, because sometimes this stuff can be unsettling. When a teacher challenges your view of reality, and then you've got to walk back out into the world, and all of a sudden you don't know whether you're dreaming or not, because the teacher had just pulled the rug out from under your feet. And, psychologically a little scary, but that's why we create this support structure, so that you have a place to return to and that net to hold this kind of inquiry. So thanks, Lawrence. And then when I worked on this koan not too long ago with Tenshin Roshi, I kept coming in and I kept presenting my understanding of the koan over and over, just kind of like beating a dead horse of like, well, don't get lost in the dream. It's a real peony. Pretty much everything I just said, and I was like, wake up, was one of my presentations. Wake up, come out of that dream state. Wake up. There's a real flower right here. And he kept ringing the bell and sending me out and saying no. And this one I worked on for a while. In other words, this Dharma talk would have failed so far. Because he's like, not good enough. Not good enough. And I was so frustrated because I was like, I get this. I get this. Like, I can read the commentary here, and even it says I get it. And he's like, no, you don't fucking get it. And he didn't say that, but in my work with Roshi, also, there's also this. If you're going to teach this stuff, you better know this stuff, and you better know it at many different levels, right? And so when you continue in your practice, you end up going through the koans kind of over and over and with different teachers, and you see different facets of them. But anyway, where Roshi was trying to get me to go, and I finally got there after some frustration, was where Myon had taken me with that, dream about harming tourists in, a foreign country, was like, don't discount the dream either. Don't discount dream and that dream state and the things that you see when you're saying you're unconscious or you're saying you're asleep. Don't discount that experience either. Because if we're looking at the mind and the creations of the mind and questioning that reality all the time, then isn't the dream also a state of mind and a creation of mind? And why discount that too? And I won't share my passing presentation because that would not be fair. But, you know, it did to any of you that faces koan down the road, because each of us have to have our own experience with them. But it does come from that space of, yeah, there's the wake up side, and then there's the embrace the dream side. You know, that is a state of reality as well. Which is why this question that came up around the coroner's statement was like so resonant for me. It's like, you know, that like, well, where is the soul in that kind of situation, and how does that exist? And if I were, I think, on the heels of this talk, trying to offer comfort to somebody that had just lost somebody in that kind of circumstance, I would probably go more to the place of, well, the true self, the soul, you know, exists beyond suffering all the time. You know, that's a different level of being and consciousness that you know we're working on with Buddhism, is in the end of suffering. You know, that true nature is in a different, boundless, infinite space. You know, and that true nature is still a part of the fabric of all being, and it's timeless, it's beginningless, it's endless. So that's my little caveat should this talk find itself out there. But I honestly believe that. And then to take the dream thing one step further, I was with, it's too bad Paul's not on, but this is anniversary weekend or something, yeah. But I had the opportunity, I was in India a few years ago, and I had a few days in between teaching assignments, and I said to my hosts, they said, well, what do you want to do with the long weekend? It was a long weekend, and I said, I want to go to an ashram. And they were like, well, okay. And so they said, you know, then came back, what kind of ashram do you want to go to? Do you want to go to one that has great food, or like it has massage, or is you know, nature? And I said, no, I actually want to go to and like ashram, you know, like you know, like John Lennon would have done, you know, or something like, I want to go experience this Indian ashram thing. So my hosts were longtime members of the Self-Realization Fellowship, and they said, well, we can set you up to go to Ranchi, but it's very bare bones. And I said, good, you know, and so there's a lot of stories attached to this. I had to go to the airport in New Delhi and get on a plane and fly to this small town, Ranchi, in another part of India, and find a taxi and be by myself and find my way to this ashram and show up. And there seemingly was nobody there, and it was 103 to 105 degrees and humid, and you know, I've got a bag and I'm walking around going, where do I go? And so I finally found someone, and they said, well, you're welcome to explore the grounds, and but there's tea at 3 before the next service and sitting. And I said, oh, okay, great. And so I did spend some time just walking the gardens, and then I decided I would take a nap before tea. And so I lay down on this cot that was just a little mattress about this thick, and a sheet and nothing else but mosquito netting because it was so hot. I lay down in this cot. Now, Ranchi is the place where Yogananda had his vision that he should come to America and start the Self-Realization Fellowship here. Ranchi was a boys' school that he founded there. And so it was really the beginning of this whole SRF thing. And now remember, I'd done some work with them, but self-realization fellowship is not my practice. Yogananda is not my guru. Officially, I'm not a disciple. I haven't taken those vows or done any of that. So like this is kind of outside of the realm of my practice and my lineage. Anyway, so I take a nap, and I had the most amazing dream. And this is a funny thing about dreams, because it was so specific. And I was in India and walking down this path, and there were side paths, going off of this path in India, and each of the side paths there was a woman, a nun, sitting there in saris and everything, and walking down this path, and looking at the side paths, and it was all very specific. The environment, and it was not Ranchi, but it was all very specific, and the women were very specific, though I had never met or seen any of them before. And I stopped at this one side path and looked over at this nun, and then I looked back, and there was like this purple, I'm sorry this is too woo-woo and it's going to scare a bunch of people off, but anyway, there was this purple like orb floating in front of me. It's just like this kind of almost egg-shaped, bright purple orb, floating in front of me. And I looked over to the nun, and she just nodded, and I looked back, and this purple orb just went boom, and went right into where the third eye is, right? And it transformed into an alabaster eye. And at that moment, now this is a dream, right? At that moment, I had this profound realization of just like everything just blew wide open, and there was nothing left, and not me, not anything. And it was the most joyful, peaceful experience, ever. And so I'm floating in this space, and the next thing I know, a woman is at the cot, gently shaking me and saying, Dan, it's time for tea. It's time for tea. And I kind of woke up, and I looked and said thank you, and there was no one there. This is a pretty cool experience, and no drugs involved. No drugs involved. And so like this, as plain as day, this woman had shaken me and awakened me and said it's time for tea. And yet when I was awake, there was nobody there. So anyway, I went on and got tea, and then I did service and sat with the gang there. And it was a really special thing. They actually don't allow outsiders in, but because of the work that I had been doing with SRF, I got to be there. And then somebody, unbeknownst to me, had set me up to do a series of interviews with the Swamis there. And so now all of a sudden I'm doing these interviews with the Swamis there, and they're asking me about Zen. And I'm like I'm this small. And like, hi, my name is Dan, and I know nothing. I'm here in Ranchi at the India. Please don't ask me questions. But they're asking me questions. So anyway, with one of the Swami Sharwananda, I think, Sharalananda, I did not relate this dream in detail, but I just said, what is the difference between a dream and a vision? And he looked at me and just smiled and said, a dream comes and goes. A vision will change your life. In other words, a vision will appear as the substance of your life going forward. You know, and I thought that was so beautiful, but it also goes to this question we're looking at, and even this koan. You know, people see this peony as in a dream. How do you hold the peony? How do you chant with your ears? You know, you all are only the second group I've ever told this story to. About the dream in India. I had a chance later to be running another workshop up at SRF with the monks and nuns there. And it felt appropriate to share the story. And I had like 30 monks and nuns looking at me just smiling. They just had this like kind of weird, knowing, loving smile, you know. And I just took it in, and here we are. Anyway, I thought that was worth sharing. I think it's really an interesting thing in this practice to look at. I see you, Melanie. To look at. She just can't wait to say anything. Say something.
I think that's a stretch.
No, I think she was. We'll see. Anyway. I wanted to share that. I wanted to share this koan, you know, wake up and smell the peony, and also celebrate the dream, and enjoy the sometimes fuzzy line between them, and learn from them, you know, because our dreams have their own reality to them. They are our consciousness and our subconsciousness working, you know, and where do you draw that distinction? I mean, there is sleep, and biologically different things happen in sleep. You know, there's 4 stages of sleep, and REM is the one in which we dream. But, you know, I think in the safe bounds of this practice, it's always worth exploring, you know, what is real? You know, where is my true self in this? And what is there to learn? You know, it is so wondrous. You know, pretty wondrous having that alabaster eye. But, you know, when I got on the plane and came home, I don't have an alabaster third eye. Or do I? I don't know. I don't know. That's probably the most mystical Dharma talk we're going to get for a while. I think I'll open it up for questions and answers and see where we go.